Okay, they are on mute. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Continuous spin. Where is the slideshow? There it is. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would want me to change both?
I can do one. You can
Yeah.
do the other. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, and it's a pleasure always to come and share the research work I do on women scientists in India. For me, all of your perhaps are the subjects, and I look at this problem not necessarily from a sociological lens. I look at the problem from a lens that would allow me to see the interaction of the women scientists and use the training in sociology so that I'll be able to understand the problem in a way and interact with y'all in a way that we are able to keep the dialogue open. Um, just to give a brief background of the work that I've done, two major surveys that I have done on women scientists in India. The first one was about a decade back in 2011 when the report was out. It was a study that I did with the Indian Academy of Sciences, Train Scientific Women Power, How Much Are We Losing and Why? And Rohini Godbole was my co-principal investigator on that study. That study that covered a large number of women scientists who had left science after a PhD. And it took me almost 2.5 years to reach my target of at least 100 women scientists. I could reach only 89 of them. Many of them were not in the public domain, and those who were available, many of them did not want to participate in the study. And as a social scientist, I respect that space. And so it took me some time before I really got those set of women who actually participated in the study. So what I'll try and do today in the short time that I have, I'll share with you the work that I've done. So that was one study. The second study I did in 2017. That was a fallout of the first study, where I conducted interviews of over 131 women scientists. The first study did not have a better representation of women who came from universities from small towns, and that was one of the complaints when I was interacting with them, that all studies cover women who are from elite institutions and their realities are not our realities. And so I made an effort to try and cover them. That was the second part. What I'll share today is the outcome of both the studies that has been guiding my research work. So I have a set of research questions that I reformulate as I conduct my research study and try and see if those questions can be answered. I have some numbers because I think numbers are very important, but I can tell you all very clearly the numbers will not tell you the full story. But I keep the numbers because that makes a large number of policy makers happy. It also sort of connects with the science, the scientist, because they all often wonder what are the numbers. And the last part of my presentation is on the field insights I have had over the research work that I've carried. So, what are the questions that guide my work? I think it was very important for me to define what is women's professional success when compared to men's. All the studies that I have been doing, I broadly tried to see that I look at questions of women, but I also get the perspective from men. And this is not to say that I want the women to follow what's the pattern of the man, but more importantly, I think the space in science has been occupied by men. They have broadly defined the rules in which this space is operating. It's important to understand how it operates and then try and see what are the changes or how do we look at redefining it, while they are also a part of this entire process of redefinition. So I look at numbers, I look at the educational level and the representation by gender. I look at stereotypes and try and question many of the stereotypes because I think they become important for one to question, because very often we get into the stereotype block and they say this is how women do, and then after that I think we are not able to proceed. The second part of it is I try to look at professional outcomes vis-a-vis family outcomes. For a large number of women, professional and family life go together. So it's important to understand how families are changing, because I think the family structure is also fast changing, how society is also changing, the process of socialization, the attitudes that are formed, and the gender roles and the changing gender roles, which become very important. The greatest attention, I think, in the study of gender in science has been the pipeline metaphor or the leaky pipeline. And here, what I try to do is, can we really trace the journey of the scientist from schooling, college, into a scientific career, and into leadership positions or decision making positions? And it's important that how is it? It's important for us to focus on the leap. It is not that the leak happens the same way across the years. And so I think the numbers become important to see if the leak is also shifting. And more importantly, my work has focused not on seeing why women don't succeed in science. I think for us it is important to also look at how women have survived the system. So I think the whole story is for to understand how women have left the system and what are the reasons, and how women have survived the system and how have they done that. And that is very important for us to look at. The numbers, I think if you look between the decade 1950 to 2011, you'll find that 1915, the women, the percentage of enrollment of girls in science was extremely small. And over the decades, it has been increasing. And 2010-11, I think the numbers are really high for science if you look at the range of increase. You don't find the same increase when you're looking at engineering, where it is still much slower. And it is very important for us to understand why the discipline of engineering still seems to be not very friendly to women as a space, or women decide that is not a space I want to go. So I don't even want to take a position, whether it is from the workspace or whether it is women, but it's important for us to understand why that change seems to be slow. I also looked at disciplines where women are enrolled in PhD, and to my surprise, the largest number of women who are enrolled in PhD is in the science stream, because I think you have a huge number of fellowships for women in science. The country has been promoting science and technology hugely post independence, and that's only growing. And if you look at the funding for science when you compare it to social science, it is almost a minuscule funding that you get for social sciences or for liberal arts when you compare for science. And this is not to argue that the funding for science is too much. It is only to say that when disciplines grow in isolation or domains grow in isolation when compared to the others, I think it creates a kind of a noise and becomes difficult when the other domains don't grow, because then the social aspects of this entire growth itself will get less studied. So I think it's very important for us to see that we maintain some kind of a balance in terms of the kind of funding. In fact, there was one of my colleague at NIAS who said that the funding in social sciences may not even add up to the funding that happens to employ the drivers in the science stream, because the funding is hugely slashed. It is even more slashed right now, post COVID. And I can, for one, say that it is extremely difficult to get funding in social sciences. So, to study some of the social aspects, it becomes very difficult. Then the social aspects get studied by people who are in science, and then there's a lack of training.
What's the
So,
x-axis?
yeah,
Social, what the x-axis?
the x-axis is the number. So you have science, engineering, social sciences, information science, mathematics, education, management, commerce, arts, and uh, fine arts. I think fine arts is the last one. Now, if you look at the women in STEM 2019 and 20, and you look at it from the undergraduate to the PhD level, it is surprising to see that at the postgraduate level, the enrollment of women is past 50%. You have larger enrollment of women in the masters when you compare even for the undergraduate. And I think that is a very positive sign. And at the PhD level, you have something like 41%. And if you compare it to many of the countries in the West, the problem for us is not that women are not getting into science. Our problem is very different. I think women are leaving science after the highest training. And I think that is something that one needs to pay attention to. This is the postgraduate enrollment, and I just want to see how it is slowly rising, and now it is about 55%, 2019 and 20, which is big. So this is the gender enrollment in the STEM disciplines, which I said. So what is that for me? What do the numbers tell you? The numbers say that yes, there is a growing representation of women in the STEM discipline. It is definitely a positive sign. They are disciplines with a lower number of women. It's important to see. So while we make groups STEM together, it is also important to look at specific streams in the STEM discipline and see if the numbers are different, and if they are different, what could be the possible reasons. I'm not saying that the possible reasons would be the same across, but I think you really need to find out what is the reason why certain disciplines, the number of women are not growing. It is also important to see when you look at the data, and at the DST, I remember when they would get this S&T data book, I always found that the data on the way they read the gender data was problematic. Because what they did is they looked at women as a whole and then looked at the percentage of women in science, in arts, which is not the way that you have to read it. You have to take science and see what is the percentage distribution. That shift in terms of reading the data also brought to the fore the importance of the poorer representation of women. And that shift you can see in the AISH data that you see, the All India Survey for Higher Education, where they do it by specific streams. And that will tell you which streams attract more women and which streams have lesser women representation. It is also important for us to look at the gender gap. So earlier we looked at the gender gap in terms of undergraduate education, the numbers grew. Then we looked at masters, the numbers grew. And at the PhD level also it grew. But today when you look at the data in terms of enrollment at the national level, the biggest problem, and that was one of the papers that I actually wrote with Bhushan, which said that you don't have enough numbers to enter college education for you to meet that 35% enrollment that the country seems to be racing to reach. Because a large number of women, because you don't have data of students who pass out of the 11th and 12th at the national level. So data becomes extremely important for us to see, because if you don't have the data for us to see, you don't know where the problem is. You are looking at school enrollment and concentrating on increasing enrollment at the primary school level, which is improving, but at the secondary school level, you have a problem. Okay. So, oh, sorry. So it's important for us to see what is the changing gender gap that you see at the student level, at the faculty level, at decision-making level, leadership, and also institutions. In fact, I think now the research needs to concentrate and see which institution is doing better on the gender ratio across these levels, rather than aggregating it at the national level, because you have clearly different patterns for different states. You have different patterns for different types of institutions. You also have specific institutions that stand out and cannot address the gender gap. They're struggling to address the gender gap, and it's important to really make that available. So one of the recommendations of the first report that I had is it's important for us to tell that institutions should mandatorily put up data in terms of gender breakup of students and faculty across departments. Even today, I struggle to get that number. I will have to go department to department, collect the number, and say, here is the problem. And despite this recommendation, among many other recommendations which they took for perhaps women who had a break in career, I think giving them a career that would help them to span up to 60, that they took. But this particular thing has still not come up. And I think that data should be made available in the public domain for us to understand why some institutions do better. I think the Gati scheme that is currently that the institutions are adopting is good because you are also trying to focus on institution as one rather than looking at the numbers rising. Because when you look at the numbers at the national level, some institutions do well and some of them don't do well. So, what is the story of women's low participation in research? See, when I did this research with the Indian Academy of Science, that was the same time that I also did with a very small funding of about 5 lakhs, where I tried to look at collecting data from the library in terms of the number of PhDs that are being produced. And over 2 years, I could put the data together, and that report really got a lot of attention. And I said, it's not too much of an effort to really give data at the national level. And after that, if you see the Aish got instituted, and today now we have data on a real-time basis. Otherwise, always our data was 4 5 years older when you're looking at the data, and today we can clearly say that we have most recent data that they have put in place. It is also important for us to move beyond frameworks that have empirically established that societal factors and personal choice, domestic responsibilities is responsible for women not participating in science. I think these are factors that may play a role, but these are not the only factors that influence or that impacts the lower participation of women. I also say that when one is looking at factors at the societal level and family, at the level of family, both of them are very strong footholds of patriarchy. It's very hard to change them because the numbers are larger. And hence, the argument is if organizations can change. I do understand organizations also consist of people who come from society. So you carry the same attitudes into that. But I still think it's a limited space where change can happen. And so to shift attention and not take the cover of societal factors, if society changes, things will happen. Rather, I think when institutions take responsibility, we would be able to see more women in the workspaces in science. It is also important to explore alternative frameworks to include formal spaces of work. And here again, I think when we did our study, we found that if there's a lot that you can learn from the private sector or the IT or the BT sector, which looked at putting certain measures in place to enable women to participate in the workspace, whether it is like work from home, it's ways in which people are dropped home, food provided, the whole host of things that the private sector did, which which academic institutions can learn. It is also important to see why women make a choice and look at that choice critically rather than look at it just at a superficial level. We have to look at counter evidence to prove that women's productivity is not low. And I think it is important for us to understand why, when you're looking at publications in the current format, you may find that women are publishing lesser when compared to men. I think it's important to examine that because I think networking is very closely connected to your funding. Funding is closely connected to you publishing your work. Publishing your work is closely connected with your performance measures, and all of these four cannot be looked at in isolation. So it's very important that we look at it. We need to make a systematic study of publications and changing patterns across gender because they are studies that have been done. But I think at the India level, it would be a very important thing to try and see whether these patterns are changing and where do women publish, how do they do it, do they have more collaborators, what goes into the number of publications, all of that becomes important. We have to look at the culture of higher education institutions and look at their changing practices. Some of the institutions are making changes. Some of the institutions change is not happening. It's important to see whether it is the leadership at one level, because I think you have to work at this at both the levels. You need to build pressure from below. You need the leadership to also respond. And unless you have critical numbers at different levels where this can be articulated and not simply articulated, where it can also be heard. Because I think articulation is just one point. You can be dismissed completely. But how do we get them to pay attention to what we are saying becomes even more important. we have to also acknowledge the point that women researchers are not a homogeneous group. And this study that I did at 2017 really was like an eye opener. A lot of things that we thought worked for women now in terms of big cities, in elite institutions, still haven't moved for a large number of women who are struggling in universities in small towns. And they still have a lot of those factors which perhaps we have seen 3, 4 decades before. And it's important to understand when you look at the spectrum of women scientists, they cannot be forgotten in the story that we want to say about the women scientists. Because I think their struggles are very different and they bring to the table a whole set of new challenges, a whole set of new responses to the challenges while they're straddling their work life balance. Awards and recognition, I'll quickly pass through. I think most of you all have this data. And I just said that when I looked at this data, it looked like because it is 4.1 in terms of the gender gap, you quickly have another graph that looks at it from 2002 to 2021, just to make you feel better that the rise is 12.4. It's simply that, because the change is so slow, you look at ways in which you can represent to say that change is happening. I think she still remains as the only woman to win a Fields Medal who died very early. And the question is, how did she make it? I don't think we can get her story, but I think if anyone is sort of getting awards or medals in areas which probably women have not made it, I think it's important to understand how they have navigated that. Because getting medals are also not within quotes only merit. It means a lot more ways in which you could be considered for award. Although all of us would like to believe that it is fair, I'm not questioning the fairness, but I think it is important for each one to understand how do you navigate and get into that position of being considered and being awarded. The gender breakup is improving in terms of fellows when you compare earlier. In fact, if you look at the young women scientists of INSA now, the representation is better. But the question is, we still have a long way to go. 10% is not what it is. And I think it's important that also needs to be corrected very differently because I don't think women or men believe that women are not doing well. I think one needs to see what is the process and can the process be made more inclusive in a way by not compromising on merit. And I think one needs to pay attention to how it could be done. What are the field insights? I think it's important for us to focus on the structure of opportunity of women researchers. What is the structure of opportunity? When you talk of opportunity, it is not that we encourage women to apply. That is not what is opportunity. For me, opportunity is if you're able to correct the numbers over a period of time, then you have been able to define what opportunity is, which is more inclusive. If you're not able to reflect that in your outcomes, then there's a problem in your structure of opportunity. And I think one needs to pay attention to it. What facilitates or inhibits their entry into certain domains or certain fields when compared to the others? This again, they say it is a choice women make. I don't think it is a choice women make. I think it's something more than that. It's important for us to look at comparative studies of men and women and have a deeper investigations of the hidden mechanisms of discrimination. So discrimination, gender discrimination that you're looking at will not be in a static form. The moment you see and recognize and you pay attention to the gender discrimination that is operating, it will start operating in a very different form. So, for one to address gender discrimination, whether it is in your personal life or it is in your professional life at the organization, if you are not alert, you will see it appearing in very different subtle forms. And before you recognize it, you see that you've already traveled a long distance. There is need for historic data that lends to critical and imaginative analysis. It's important to see historically how women have moved. And even today, if I look at the documentation of the stories of women who have done well across different categories, because like what I argued, women scientists are definitely diverse. So you can't take the story of only one woman. But I think the way these stories are written do not give you all of the aspects that help you understand the complete story. Because what happens is, while you're interviewing a woman and you're asking questions, one, it is also the tact or the training that you have in terms of getting data, in terms of interviewing women. Two, how do you present that data and how you make sure that the women are also not telling you what you want to hear, because you are also interviewing women who are intelligent. We run into these problems even when we carry out studies in rural areas, because people have now learned what you want to hear. And if you're not able to see it, and as a researcher, you're not able to cut through that, then I think you're already telling a story that is told and you're not telling something new. It is important to conceptualize professional identification as a career commitment. So I think it's important to look at new categories like career commitment, career satisfaction, professional self image. All of these become contributing factors if you want to really be successful in your career. The work life balance. I think it's important when you're looking at the work life balance, although you have a lot of research, they have been mainly dominated by the conflict theories, where there's a negative influence on the outcome, whether it is at work or at home. I think it's important for us to stop paying complete attention to only the negative influence. It's important to look at the positive influence that you have when women strike their work life balance. It's important to look at paying attention to phenomena, to decision making by which people manage conflict. Many of the women, in fact, yesterday when I was uh, talking to all of you all here, it was very clear for us to see that when women are managing conflict, they decide which battles they fight. You cannot fight all your battles. You also decide when will you decide to keep quiet. You have to look at an opportunity in which you're able to articulate and get heard. It's important to see how do you address the question of you being dismissed or of you being not heard. How many of us go out after a meeting, reflect and say, I tried to tell this, and why I was not able to? Was it that they were shouted down? Don't we have the tactic? And in fact, when I talked to a few of the women leaders, they said they have learned it through the years of being able to tell what they want, get it heard, and get it recorded and considered in the decision making process. So that's a huge learning, and that space, since you do not have a large number of women there, you don't have really, what do you say, you don't have enough data or understanding of how to navigate that particular space. And it's also important to see that for many of the women who are trying to strike their work life balance, they're also struggling to see how do they mentor young women. Because if you have to mentor, it means a lot more investment, not only in terms of time, but also emotionally. And as it is, you are struggling with it at the home front. You're struggling with it with your job and your students. To again look at mentoring and expand it further, I think it's difficult. And we should be looking at a we have to look at developing strategies in which mentoring becomes an important part. And in this, I'd like to mention that, Shobana, not that many, I know many of the efforts that's been done. I'm sure large number of women do it, but yesterday when talking, she was telling me about ISR Mohali, how they are looking at mentoring very systematically. Shobana has been very systematically looking at mentoring the third world fellows of the Third World Academy of Sciences, because those efforts also need to be documented and analyzed, because then you know how people balance between mentoring and also building their professional career. Documenting and analysis of women who negotiate the work life balance, I think, is very important. I don't think all of us in this room, many of us may be friends, but I don't think we have ever had the space for us to discuss how we actually negotiate it. Because every day it is a battle, and every day we are trying to do it, but we really don't have the space where we can share that. It's important for us also to look at when people talk of hiring and retaining women in research, many of them say that it is fair. The hiring process is fair, the promotional process is fair. But you ask them for the data and they'll tell you it's confidential. You talk to them and they'll say it is subjective. And they say, no, no, but then we are very fair. Now, what is the sense of fairness there? How does it operate? And if you don't see that information, And if the information is seen only by the set of people who are doing it, who already think it is fair, then there is no scope for correction. But that data just doesn't get shared. Even in my second research that I did, I just did not get data on that. They said, no, no, we cannot. So I was giving them an example of the agricultural scientist, where they have a very clear format that says that how are you measured in terms of for promotion? What should you do and what are the bands? Nobody wants to put it out upfront there, because then you know whether you're qualified to apply or not. It makes the process very easy. No, 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 no. This will then interfere with our subjective judgment. So maybe some deserving person will not get. So I think somewhere we have to get a middle path and try and see how do we do it. It's also something that the Indian, not only within the Indian scene, even at the Western world, that we have really not looked at issues of issues that young scholars face in terms of research scholars and postdocs, because they do not have a tenured position, but that is the age at which they also have to look at starting a family, getting married. And if you look at how things are panning out, I think the age of marriage is moving, because there's no other way, because people are not considering it. Uh, yeah, in mentoring, I just want to just make 2 points. One is, I think, when you're looking at role models and we say they are absent, you're basically talking of role models, because I think a large number of women look at role models like Madame Curie, the highest level. There are a lot of role models who are at the middle level who are doing extremely well. But you don't have access to that in terms of whether it is that. So I think when standards are set very high, then you think you don't have a role model. So I think that aspect needs to be really researched, and you have to see how do you look at role models that need not be the standard of exception. Even in the workplace, visible successful women are usually single. So you think that's the role model. But I think it's very important. It's not that women who have families are not successful, but they don't have the time to make themselves visible, because they manage family and they manage their thing, and they have to straddle these two. So they cannot be in forums where they can say that, hey, you can do both. And I think that's something that came out in both the studies, that they do exceptionally well. The experiences are extremely good in terms of looking good, in the sense that they are not talked about. And I think there's a lot of lessons for the others to learn through them. And I think it's important to look at it. Advances of women in STEM that fit into the current century is important, and we have to produce new and inclusive ways in which we can look at the complex ways in which the work life balance is changing. In fact, the recent article that I had in Gender Science and Technology 2022 looked at the changing patterns of work life balance, which is very different, but you really have that spectrum. It's important to recognize the spectrum still exists. One of the things I feel when we are looking at women studies or research done with women scientists, very often we think that is peculiar to the women scientists. I think for all professional lives, and large challenges that we are looking for women scientists are also there. So it's important to see what is peculiar for women in the STEM discipline, and what is not peculiar but is part of women professionals in other disciplines. Women who take off real time for mentoring say that it impacts their work. And if you look at women, they have less access to startup packages, to independent projects, and they also have less informal support. And in the informal support, I think a large number of women say that it's very hard to draw the line between patronizing and looking at support. And many women think that they have to do it on their own. And I think that has been one of the reasons why it is. May not be true of all. I see her looking at it. Older women have more powerful stories of being marginalized when compared to younger women. I think the younger women who have entered with bigger numbers. They have also having part of the benefits of the fight that the older women have done. And so I think their experience of discrimination is very different. So what is happening? You have family friendly policies that is needs to be informed with more focused research. More younger men are willing to participate actively, and that has been seen. Men take responsibilities that enable their wife to balance home and work. Negotiations happen. Sometimes it happens even before the marriage happens. Decisions about children are jointly taken. and they are more active and long-term mentoring of women scientists that you see now. So what are the options people are looking at? They are choosing a spouse partner from out of science, academia, and they're seeing if that works. Not that it works always, but I think they are experimenting with it. They are looking at weekend distant marriages. They are looking at choice of spouse and partner. If it doesn't match, you move and say, yes, I'm not getting married. It's fine. But here on the table, can we agree on these non-negotiables? They are able to do it. They're also choosing not to have children, or they're choosing to have lesser number of children, or choosing just to be partners. The whole lot of things that women are actually negotiating today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anita. Maybe someone has a comment, we can. Anupama? So I had a couple of questions. And first of all, let me thank you. It was a wonderful talk. You mentioned about the number of PhDs in science being the highest, but how does that compare, for example, with respect to the numbers you have in, say, the postgraduate or the undergraduate levels, if you're just looking at the ratios?
The numbers, it would be much lesser when you look at the postgrad, although I have given the percentages there and not the actual numbers.
Yeah.
I just put out the actual numbers just in terms of the whole thing. But in percentages, it's much lesser. But I think if you look at the degree of rise in terms of support for PhD, that is,
Yeah, science is
That is
definitely doing better, probably because you also have more numbers. You know, it's like a feeding circle, sort of.
not necessarily liberal arts, you have a lot of women. But I think they just don't get a sense what, see, with respect to science, I think you very clearly know where it's leading. The road is drawn more clearly. For liberal arts, it's always, I think, a PhD was for you to really get back to teaching in the university alone. And I think that division must have, can answer that.
And another question was that is there a breakup within the science streams on the percentage of women? Recording.
No, you're not getting the breakup. See, in terms of data, I'm telling you, no, from 1960, they gave data for postgraduates across all domains together. Then you fought with them and said, no, we want it by discipline. Then they gave you by discipline after several years. Then they will not give you the gender breakup. Then when they give you the gender breakup, then they will not give it at a higher level. So now even faculty, I think it should be out there. I think the gender breakup of faculty across disciplines, it's not hard to collect. These people put so many rules. They say that your funding is concurrent to you giving me this information. All of this can be on the website of institutions. It's not at all difficult.
Yeah, I think, for example, ASI can give about astronomy. It's a very narrow field, but we are maintaining that.
Yeah.
So at least like that, if the Indian Physics Association maintains or something like that, it might help.
It would really.
So they have moved to that.
Sanam.
Thanks for such a nice talk. It's just that I also find this, I mean, I'm interested in this. So I have gone through iShape, and it actually gives breakup in terms of, I actually wrote that down. If I will get a minute, I thought I'll say that. So PhD in science, 51,000 students are doing, and physics is like 7,500, and 3,000 are female. So, throughout you will see that there's a very nice percentage of female, but what happens is that, so for example, out of the in BSc honors there are like 45% female, but BSc normal will be much higher, for some 55. MSc is like 63%. So and in zoology it will go to some 73%. So, but what happens is this PhD in science, this 3,000 that you see, they would not be in institutes of national importance. they would be doing PhD at lesser known universities and are in their same state, and so that's the difference. So that also gets reflected in terms of the employment. For example, lecturer there are 43%, reader there are 37%, and professor 27%. But this is throughout India. So if you now go for colleges, it is 43%, so universities 37%. So now first you go for universities 37%, then professor. So if you go for institutes of national importance, then you go for faculty, it will be 15%. So how it falls, and that's what she was stressing, that you have to see it institute wise also, like, so where are they, and the main reason that I have found it through in my experience also, and talking to various people, is that this you have to do postdoc abroad. That is the main constraining factor because of marriage and also safety and stuff like that. And so you only do if your spouse is also at least in the same country or in the same continent. And one more thing was there. Okay, now I forgot.
So let's have our discussion afterwards, maybe, because we always keep a time for questions.
There's another short presentation which Harvinder is going to make. He's also chair of the session, so it's a little awkward for the chair just before her own presentation.
Maybe you should take over. Yeah, maybe you should chair my session.
Divya, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Maybe she can
Preeti, okay, perfect. Yeah, now
Yes. Okay, I think we're back to normal. I can see. So I can definitely introduce Harvinder.
Preeti, but you need to be on this one.
Okay, so first I want to thank Anita for an excellent talk. And our next speaker is Professor Harvinder Jussel. Professor Jussel is an astroparticle physicist at IISER Mohali. She studies topics at the interface of particle physics and cosmology. At present, she's working on the theoretical and observational aspects of dark energy. Harvinder, as you all obviously already know, is also a member of the WGGE. And today she's going to be presenting the gender survey of the ASI, the results from the questionnaire that was circulated 2 ASI meetings ago. Harvinder, please go ahead.
The screen is not shared.
Yeah.
There's a green button there, that small box right side. Just a green arrow.
Sir, just wait, I will do it for you.
And
Okay, thanks a lot, Preeti. So I'll present in a very brief. In a very brief presentation, I will give you a summary of the gender survey which we which we had circulated in December 2020. Very preliminary results I had presented in the online conference in 2021, but this is the survey results for you. They're largely consistent with what Anita has just talked about, but I'll be showing you a lot of bar charts. This it's not changing the screen.
just click on it once and that's it.
Okay, so this was the form which was circulated. It was in someone's view a rather large form, and this was circulated to ASI members so far only, and there were questions in this gender form asked for information about personal information like age, gender, and professional information like their academic position. And then we had a category of gender issues in workplace, the kind of discrimination that one might see over there. We also had, because this is an ASI conference, participants also, ASI also does conference organization. We decided to talk about gender issues in conferences. Then we also asked questions about, because we have had a large number of WGG sessions in ASI meetings, and we wanted to find out basically what are the perceptions of the community for WGG's role in its effectiveness. And also we asked for suggestions for further actions, and a large number of suggestions did come in, which we essentially categorized into different categories, and a brief summary will be there. A detailed report has been is with the WGG now, and I presume the chair will be or has shared it with the EC or maybe later. Okay, so this is the total number of responses is 97, which is this is the gender distribution of responses. 54.6%, as you can see over here, people who identify their gender as male and others are female. And then the other two pie charts show you the the age distribution of women and men. So since the number are not very large, and we basically decided to only put two categories, men respondents and women. Okay, and we did not put many other factors because we'll need more data and more numbers and more people to take this survey, and hopefully this survey will be circulated again and people can. Okay, so as I said, the first section of this form had personal and professional information. We talked about academic position, age, marital status, and we also asked questions about whether they have senior administrative positions like director, dean in the institute they're working in, and also whether they are parts of committees, both national, international, and whether they have been members of various time allocation committees, and questions like that. And also other questions related to their academic work as journal editors, board of editors, and also whether they have been served as referees in international or national journals. This is a table which summarizes the age and academic positions. So it's interesting because, and it's not very surprising because it was circulated only to ASI members, so therefore this column would not be filled up. Okay, and so basically it was most respondents were in the mid-career. And coming back to this, you can see that for the age profile of women respondents is on the slightly younger side compared to the men in this survey. And we have given all these detailed numbers in the report that we have prepared. So this is the response separated by gender of male and female respondents. So as you can see over here, the red bars are for males, and female respondents are represented by the blue bars over here. And you can see that all these positions in senior administration to Indian journals, etc., there are more males than female, but in this case, the respondents. The women are less in numbers in all these, including TAC memberships and international committees. Okay. So all this, they were different questions, and they have been summarized together in this particular chart. Okay, and the second category of questions were basically to understand how whether we see the discrimination, both overt as well as subtle discrimination. And we also asked about these issues like whether they face two-body problem, and whether one of them took a lower position to be in the same city as their partner, or whether they have for a time worked in different cities or not. And we had some perception questions about how whether there is discrimination in a workplace, whether there is harassment, both sexual or gender harassment, and whether whether it's easy to write a complaint, and whether there is a follow-up to these complaints in various ICCs. So again, I will just summarize some of the things, and I request you to look at the detailed report for that. So this is, of course, this is a two-body problem, took lower position. Now this question was not very well formed on our part, because we asked whether you or your partner took a lower position We did not specifically ask a woman or a man whether they had taken it. So maybe with the help of sociologists, we can make more fine-grained questionnaire in that sense. But nevertheless, even here, it gives us a lot of idea that took lower position has been said yes to by more women, took lower position as which they felt they were eligible for a higher position, and they took lower position in this. Okay. And face two body problem is also very high for women in this case. And many of the men have responded that their partner does not work outside the house. These are some things which are, as Anita also pointed out in her presentation, some of the things are more subtle, or you basically perceive your, this is a perception, again, a perception question, whether you are discriminated against in a meeting or generally what happens. And exactly this thing she had mentioned, and I'm showing it in bar charts, whether you're top down. And of course, more women said, yes, they've been top down. And in a meeting, they are often mistaken as a secretary of the group rather than, and not considered as a astronomer. Not that I'm saying anything bad about this. Largely ignored in meetings. And these are important. This also, as I was showing this results to Anita, and she said, this is quite consistent with what she has seen all over. And they're less likely to be promoted. And in fact, this also has a credit is given to a male co-author for papers, and they hear more men agree than women in percentages. And so this also tells you that how, which is not very overt discrimination, can be perceived also in this case. And we then these are questions whether they are more difficult questions to basically in seminar or colloquia, if a woman is speaking, whether they are more difficult questions, whether the tone is harsher, whether there are more interruptions, or the treatment is same for both. And you can just, it's very obviously here that it's a difference of opinion over here, that whether they are treated same or not. And women as audience was also asked a question that whether they ask fewer questions, whether they ask more questions if the speaker is a woman. And as you can see over here, and there is no difference, there is also this. And this study is also consistent with the British the society, our British contemporaries in this, and they also have seen that women are asking less questions, and unless the speaker is a woman or the first question is also asked by this is response to whether you have seen gender discrimination, whether faced gender discrimination, whether you have faced sexual harassment, or whether you know of someone who has faced it. As you can see, a very large fraction of women have said that they have seen discrimination of some sort. Okay? And sadly, the sexual harassment part is also very, very high, I would say, in my personal opinion. And then we the follow-up question whether it was easy to write a complaint. There are many comments also which people have put in the questionnaire also, which I have not listed here. So I just wanted to give you numbers and data of this survey. So this is most of the sentences ignore a complaint, took some action. I don't know how to. Basically, is putting a stop to it on a personal level. This is how I interpret this question. Took some action, put a stop to it. Talk to peer, and complaint was ignored was also one of the things which was said about. Then, since we do meet in ASI conferences, we wanted to see how many women are involved in organizations of different conferences, whether they're invited as speakers in national and international conferences, whether they're chairs, and whether just like seminars and colloquia, we also wanted to see how women speakers and audience and they are when they are in audience have received. So this is a breakup of service by women in national and international conferences. So this is again the result is similar to what we have seen earlier, I did not put the chart of questions about it because it's very consistent with what seminars and colloquia have, the charts which I have shown for here. And the last part of the gender survey was to talk about basically gender awareness and equity. We asked questions about how, whether the people have attended WGG sessions, whether they have heard the talks, and what is the role over here in WGG has also been asking the organizers to provide childcare facility, whether that helps or not. And what does the community perceive as reasons for women dropping out? As we know that they do drop out at higher levels. And we also asked for, there was an open question about suggestions for helping women's caregivers. Okay. So these are the people think that the community feels that the reasons basically for which are hindrances to women's career are basically lack of personal motivation. Some of them think that there are organizational factors like institutes and conservative society family constraints. And as Anita pointed out that these two are actually the same. So they are part of the same question, conservative society and family constraints. And the suggestions, as very consistent with what Anita just said, mentoring programs should be there. And there is complete agreement between the men and women over here that there should be more mentoring programs for younger and women astronomers, and also showcase work of women astronomers and basically publicize it and show them as role models. And there should be open discussion on these gender issues, which we actually do it in WGG sessions. Okay. And then there were comments which I have broadly categorized into institutional outreach, mentorship, and special schemes. So there were suggestions about there should be regular workshops, there should be age relaxation in hiring, as she also pointed out that the age to start a family is the same as when you are basically looking for a career also. And rethink on how recommendation letters are written. Actually officially adopt equal opportunity and affirmative action, include women in decision-making panels. Outreach, basically go out and basically press release, publicize women astronomers' work, and also to talk to people who have already left the field and to know what made them do it. As mentorship, basically you mentor more astronomers, and in particular young women. And also special schemes, special fellowship schemes, and also we comment to basically go to rural regions and do outreach over there, and also allow for part-time research if they can't come full-time. And this is the last slide I have. This is a summary of the results, and the detailed report will most likely be circulated very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Harbinder. I hope the questions there will be, I'm sure you can manage those.
We can invite her for the questions.
So questions in the
Hello,
audience.
ma'am. So there are times when women are given priority over men just to maintain the gender ratio. I think this is also a gender discrimination, because women are given the chance because of their gender, not because of their ability. So what is your opinion about it?
Maybe Anita should answer it first.
I think this is fairly a tricky question. In fact, when you're looking at when you give preference for women, is it because you don't consider merit? I think it's a much more larger problem, because you're not talking of reservations, and a large number of women scientists in my surveys, both the surveys said we don't want that, because that will then be pointed out as the reason why you have come in. But the question is, should that happen to set things right, or should we redefine how it happens? Because this is the same question you have in terms of reservations, because there is a question of cultural capital that somebody is at a disadvantage when you compare to somebody else. When you're talking of women who come from families that are not academics, there's a whole new culture that you don't have access to. So when you're talking of affirmative action, you're talking of ways in which you want to correct or factor that as an important aspect when you're looking at providing an opportunity. Because if you don't do that, and you argue and you don't correct what merit is, then I don't think these people will ever be able to get into these spaces. It will be slow, and then we can't complain that it is slow. So I think when you take on something, You have an advantage, you have a disadvantage. It's important to look at ways in which people even describe it. You're there because you're a woman. How long would they say that? Because if you think that is going to bother you, then we have to be comfortable with how things are functioning. You can't then say that we are not there. So when you get on there, you will have forces, because I think you need to understand it within the larger realm of power, because nobody gives power away. So as much as you are trying to enter into a space where you're not there, they are also trying to see that you don't enter that space. So it's not going to happen like smooth entry. They're not going to just sit down and watch you all enter that space. They'll definitely resist. And you will have to deal with it. So you can't wish it away, is what my response is.
The thing is, if you do indeed if you do indeed get a chance to sit at a table, as you said, part of committee on it, do well, do very well, so that it just goes in. That's all. Subsequent performance will be more important.
I think we have one question. Just change the microphone.
Okay,
Harvinder, can we ask questions from here?
Yeah, Indulekha, please unmute.
No, actually not Indulekha. I wanted to first go to the first questions which were asked. Sorry, Indulekha. So there is a question by Sarah Keda or Seda. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. This is for Anita's talk. She says, hello, great talk. You mentioned about how quite a few women leave STEM after the highest level of education. Do you think this is due to the binding of women with stereotypical familial values and the patriarchal society? And how do you see this getting solved?
My response is it's not because of the stereotypical families alone. I think it's important to say that they have left because many of them have very clearly said that they had to leave because either when they applied, they did not get. The largest response I had in that survey was, we left science not because we wanted to leave science, we left science because we did not get an opportunity to be in science. And I think that's clearly a distinct response that women have given. And it's important that we look at it. We'd like to believe that they left science because they had a family. If alongside I had a family or I had a child, does not necessarily mean I wanted to leave science. But I think science was not able to recognize that when you have a family, you need to look at how the workspace operates to factor in that this is also part of the role. And I think that is more important for them.
Yeah, thank you, Anita. Is there a question in the audience there, or can I go on?
There is one. There is
okay.
As we saw in the earlier data that there was a steady growth in the UG, PG and PhD admissions and the balance has been fairly attained. Is this proportional to other religious and caste minorities within the women's subgroup as an intersection? Has that increased proportionally as well?
Not necessarily. It's not proportionally increased.
Right.
I think if you look at the gender gap across the different social groups, the gender gap is larger.
Right.
For the social groups that are not there. So I think when you're looking at the data, because it's been hard to get the gender breakup, now we have to push and say that we want a gender breakup by the social groups.
Right.
And then look at what are the factors that will help to correct that.
Right. So as you mentioned, that it's already hard to get the gender breakups for different disciplines. So I think it will be much harder to get other intersectional breakups of.
But if you push, they will give.
Right.
I just think if you put pressure, because at least for the Karnataka government, in terms of enrollment at the school level, we have said, if you really want to look at change, then give us the breakup, not only by gender, but social groups. And they're doing it. It's not very hard to collect. You just have to get one more category. You may not get within each of the social groups, but at least they'll give you scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, backward class, and general merit. I think those things. But with the scientists, it's a big issue because when I did that survey of the summer fellowships, They did not want to reveal the caste and gender, and it is extremely difficult because the government wanted the caste data. They said, no, I don't think it is going to all the social groups. And they said, we won't participate in your survey. You're asking caste and you're bringing non-merit, or you're actually getting something that is not there in science. Because science would always want to think it's extremely often.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for such a thought-provoking talk. I am just not a question. You can take it as a question or as a suggestion. I am telling about the gender discrimination. We should remove the gender discrimination in science and society. Right? So, but whatever talk I still now attended, not this one, previously as well, I never heard anything about the third gender of our society. So this part is never discussed. Even from my school days to this PhD final year, I never saw a single third gender person who is struggling for struggling for education or anything else.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree that when you're talking of identities, I think it's important for us to say that the gender identity is on a continuum. And I think it's important to look at group, because any minority group that is trying to get into a space where they have not been a part of, their struggle will be even more larger, simply because their numbers are even smaller and people are not even willing to talk.
In this gender form, we had the first question was gender you identified it. It was male, female, transgender, other. But no one did that. So I just wanted to mention.
In future, can we add this part as well for these things?
No, definitely. Because I think their numbers are extremely small. Because I have seen small narrations of people struggling in some of the professional spaces, but they are extremely small because of the huge stigma that they have for them to reveal their identity. Their numbers are still very, very small. And I think it's important because institutions, if women can't enter these institutional spaces, definitely the third gender will find it even more difficult. Because they're struggling about that even in normal colleges.
Thank you.
Okay, ma'am, I also have a question. There are data which suggest that when distance of school from the home increases, girls drop out increases from the school. So is there any data for university? Let's suppose we are talking about BHU. There are MSc students. So why is there any data which break out number of girls and boys with the distance from their hometown or of their home? So I think this is also a problem which is causing dropouts of women. And as we know that we don't have we lack good university and institution at district level. So there should be a study which can suggest that whether the distance thing is impacting more girls than they are impacting the boys or men.
Very true. Because actually, I think when you're looking at girls when they enter secondary education and higher education, there's a huge thing traditionally that you tie up safety and family honor with girls. Because of which, when your institutions become further off, they're not willing to send you. And I think the battle for the women becomes much more harder. And if you look at how institutions are located, and I did that in that study of PhDs, all the PhDs, if you see, Delhi is like the PhD capital of India, and Bangalore is the PhD capital of Karnataka. Why? Why should all the institutions be crowded just in one place? One of the arguments they give is you can share resources, but I don't think that argument is strong enough, at least for me to buy. I think institutions need to be spread out. If you spread out, you will get better representation of social groups, of women, rather than having them in places that are very far off, because not many women are able to still convince families that they will travel and stay away from home for their higher education. And studies, when you asked, you don't have large scale surveys, but you have very clear research studies that say how distance defines or becomes a inhibiting factor for women to participate in education. You have research studies.
I would like to add something here, and this also adds to one of the comments you had in your talk, that why are some streams more preferred by women than the other streams. For example, it's, I guess, it has more to do with, and it's termed quote unquote as choice of women, but it is more to do with systematic upbringing that we are given, that something is for women and something is for men. I mean, girls don't do this thing, is the comment that you get at many places from your childhood, that why do you want to do, you can't change a bulb because you're a girl. That kind of continuous systematic thing that is being put in the head of the women is actually affecting the many women in higher studies and in many fields. So like if a girl says that I want to become a doctor, the family will be very happy that my girl want to become a doctor. Even after marriage, people will support that she's a doctor. But if she's an engineer and wants to go on a late night duty, she won't be supported. That's there. And it's in their very well-educated families, I'm not talking about the rural areas at all. A doctor is preferred as compared to engineer when a girl is there. Yeah. So it's not only a girl's job. It has to come from a very root level. And I think we need to integrate in the system that there are not all, I mean, I'm not saying everything is meant to be done by everybody, but we can't restrict. We can't tell a person that it's not your job to do this.
In fact, I think the process of socialization is what you're pointing out in terms of upbringing. But I don't think socialization alone is an issue. If you look into your textbooks, the same message is given. If you look into schools, the same message the teachers give you in terms of the streams that are put aside, which are streams that boys can do and things that girls can do. Because schools are also a reflection of society by and large.
So even in school textbooks, there are some places where only men picture are put doing some job, and like a doctor or a nurse, female will be put, engineer, a man will be put. That's just one example. So it's always there.
Yeah, it's also the question of caregiving that is highly associated with women's role. And that's why I think medicine is looked at it. But that's something that I think I want to really undertake, because even in medicine, I think there's a hierarchy where women are put in. And that again is sort of discussed as women's choice. You will not see them in the high paying jobs of surgeons. How many surgeons, cardiologists are women? If you take that breakup, because you still don't have that data. And that's something I want to push with ICMR, because I want to look at that data, because my hypothesis is there is a hierarchy even in medicine, a notion. And so we look at the full number and say, hey, women's representation is very good from a very long time.
Wanda, since we are here, we'll talk to Anita over here. Maybe we should take questions from the online audience now. Preeti, are there more questions?
There are quite a few questions, but I think we don't have time maybe. So I'll just maybe take one, which was actually the first one. I missed this from Barnali. I think she also had some difficulty hearing, but I think the question is really good. So this is for Anita's talk. She says, you mentioned that you performed a survey to understand what causes women to leave academia. I'm curious to know what the answer was for the majority of the participating women.
Majority of the participating women said that they left science because they did not get an opportunity to be in science.
Mm-hmm.
More than about 60% of them who said that we left science because of that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very powerful response. Okay, so I think there are quite a few things here, but I think you may be running short of time. I don't know. Let her. What do you think, Harminder?
Okay, I think the questions can be posted in the chat box and we'll forward them to Anita. And we should now close the session. And the people here can chat with, if they want more information about the survey, I can give it to you. Thanks a lot for coming at this late in the evening.
Thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Anita and Harminder.